There is a kind of quiet that most people cannot stand. Not because it is painful in any physical sense, but because it strips away every distraction and leaves a person face to face with their own mind. No performance, no crowd, no noise to hide behind, just thought. And for the majority of people, that experience becomes unbearable within minutes, because most people have never truly sat with themselves long enough to understand what is actually happening inside them. They move through life reacting. Something happens, they feel something, and they act on it without ever stopping to ask why. They form opinions and defend them without ever asking whether those opinions are actually true. They build an image of themselves and spend enormous energy protecting that image from anything that might crack it. And because of all of this, they remain deeply predictable, deeply controllable, deeply unaware. The philosopher and strategist Niccolo understood this about people centuries ago. He observed that most human beings are not driven by logic or reason. They are driven by pride, by fear, by desire, and by the desperate need to feel that they are right. And because they rarely examine these forces honestly, those forces run their lives silently, pulling strings they cannot even see. But there exists a different kind of mind. A mind that does not run from its own silence. A mind that chooses discomfort over illusion, accuracy over comfort, and self-knowledge over the shallow satisfaction of feeling certain. This kind of mind is not loud. It does not announce itself. It observes. It studies. It understands. And because of that, it becomes extraordinarily difficult to manipulate. The deeper a person understands themselves, the more clearly they begin to see others. They start noticing the patterns underneath human behavior. They recognize the anxiety hiding behind someone's aggression. They see the insecurity driving someone's need for control. They detect dishonesty not through accusations, but through quiet observation of small inconsistencies. This is not a superpower. It is simply the result of sustained, honest self-reflection. And if you already do certain things in private, things most people would never think to do, your mind is likely already operating at a level that most people around you will never fully understand. The first of these things is the willingness to challenge your own beliefs in private. Most people do not search for truth. They search for confirmation. Once a person becomes emotionally attached to an idea, that idea stops being something they think about and becomes something they protect. The moment facts begin to challenge it, pride steps forward and takes over. Suddenly, it is no longer about what is true. It is about not feeling foolish. It is about not having to admit that something you believe deeply was actually wrong. Rare intelligent individuals do something different. They sit alone and ask themselves a question that most people secretly fear. What if I am completely wrong about this? That question sounds simple, but psychologically, it is one of the most difficult questions a person can honestly face, because questioning a belief you are attached to feels like attacking your own identity. It creates a kind of internal vertigo. The ground shifts beneath your thinking, and most people immediately reach for something solid to hold on to. They stop the question before it can do any real damage to their comfort. But the honest mind lets the question go all the way, because here is what it understands that the ego-driven mind does not. A false belief, left unexamined, quietly ruins everything it touches. A person who misunderstands their own character will keep repeating the same destructive patterns and call it bad luck. A person who trusts the wrong people because their judgment is clouded by what they want to believe will keep getting hurt and blame the world for it. A person who holds on to comforting illusions instead of facing uncomfortable reality becomes, over time, someone that almost anyone with knowledge of their weaknesses can steer in whatever direction they choose. This is why the willingness to ask hard questions of yourself is not weakness. It is one of the rarest and most powerful forms of intelligence that exists. It requires something most people are unwilling to develop: the ability to separate your sense of worth from whether or not you happen to be correct. When you can do that, when being wrong feels like useful information rather than personal failure, your thinking sharpens in a way that is genuinely difficult to deceive from the outside. The second thing rare minds do privately is analyze their own emotional reactions rather than simply obeying them. Picture this. Someone says something dismissive to you in a group setting. Within seconds, your thoughts shift. Your body tightens. You start mentally replaying the moment. You start composing responses you wish you had given. Your entire internal atmosphere has changed because of a single comment, and you were barely conscious of it happening. This is the default human experience. Something triggers a feeling. The feeling immediately becomes behavior. Anger becomes a sharp reply. Insecurity becomes withdrawal. Jealousy becomes quiet resentment. And almost no one stops between the trigger and the reaction to ask a single question. Why? The mind that asks why becomes a fundamentally different kind of instrument. Instead of being swept along by emotional currents, it stands on the bank and watches them. When something stirs a strong reaction, the self-aware person becomes curious rather than reactive. They ask what this emotion is actually revealing. Because emotions are not just feelings. They are information. They point toward hidden beliefs, unresolved fears, and personal vulnerabilities that the conscious mind would rather not acknowledge. Jealousy, when examined honestly, often reveals a quiet belief that you are not enough. Anger, when traced carefully, often leads back to a wound that has not healed. Emotional overreaction to criticism often points toward an identity that is far too fragile. These are not comfortable discoveries, but they are extraordinarily useful ones, because once you know where your emotional pressure points are, other people lose a significant part of their ability to use those points against you. The calm person in a tense situation is not calm because nothing affects them. They are calm because they have developed the habit of observing their own internal weather before letting it dictate their actions. And that gap, that brief pause between feeling something and doing something, is where genuine intelligence actually lives. The third practice of the privately sharp mind is revisiting painful experiences not to suffer through them again, but to extract what they contain. Most people treat painful memories the way they treat an injury. They want to protect the wound from further contact. They distract themselves, stay busy, look forward, move on. And while there is wisdom in not dwelling endlessly in pain, there is also a cost to moving on before you have actually understood what happened. The reflective mind goes back. Quietly and carefully, it returns to the conversation that ended a friendship and looks for what it missed at the time. It revisits the relationship that collapsed and notices the warning signs that emotion had made invisible. It re-examines the decision that led to a significant loss and traces honestly the reasoning, or lack of reasoning, that went into it. What this kind of reflection produces is not bitterness. It produces pattern recognition. Life does not actually present you with entirely new problems. It presents you with familiar problems wearing different clothes. The same type of person appears in your life in different forms. The same internal mistake plays out in different contexts. The same blind spot, born from the same emotional need, keeps leading you to the same kind of edge. People who reflect seriously on their painful experiences begin to see these patterns. And once you see a pattern clearly, its power over you begins to diminish. This is how experience becomes intelligence rather than just history. Not by surviving difficulty, but by studying it afterward with the kind of honesty that is only possible when you are alone, quiet, and genuinely more interested in truth than in protecting your self-image. The fourth quality of the deeply intelligent private mind is broad, seemingly impractical curiosity. Most people filter the information they consume through a single question. What use is this to me right now? If the answer is unclear, they move on. The intelligent mind does not apply that filter with anywhere near the same strictness. It becomes absorbed in ancient negotiation strategies. It reads about the psychology of crowds. It studies how deception works, not to practice it, but to recognize it. It explores the historical patterns of how power shifts, how movements rise and collapse, how individuals who seemed untouchable became vulnerable overnight. None of this is obviously practical in the way that learning a software skill or a financial concept is practical. And yet it builds something that purely practical knowledge never builds: a mental map of how human beings actually work beneath the surface level of what they say and how they present themselves. This is what eventually creates the kind of awareness that looks almost like intuition, but is really the product of accumulated pattern recognition. When you have read enough history, you stop being surprised by political behavior. When you understand enough psychology, you stop being completely blindsided by people's hidden motives. When you have thought seriously about persuasion, influence, and the mechanics of social dynamics, you start noticing the invisible architecture of the interactions around you. Most people only ever see the surface. The curious mind eventually learns to read what is underneath it. And what is underneath it, time and again across cultures and centuries, is the same relatively small set of human drives playing out in endlessly varied forms. The fifth habit is one that requires significant psychological maturity, correcting your own thinking in real time, without performance, without drama, and without waiting for external permission. Most people experience being wrong as a threat, not just to their argument, but to their identity. So they argue past the point of belief. They double down when they should reconsider. They perform certainty to avoid the social cost of uncertainty, even to themselves. The adaptable mind operates differently. The moment it encounters evidence that its current thinking is incomplete or mistaken, it adjusts. Not reluctantly, not with emotional resistance, but cleanly and immediately, the way a navigator corrects course when new information arrives. There is no shame attached to the correction because the correction is not experienced as failure. It is experienced as an upgrade. This quality is quietly one of the most powerful a person can develop because the world changes. People change. Situations evolve in ways that no initial analysis could have fully predicted. The mind that clings to its original position regardless of new information becomes progressively less accurate over time, and therefore progressively less capable of navigating reality effectively. The mind that stays genuinely open, that treats its own positions as working hypotheses rather than fixed identities, maintains its contact with reality even as reality shifts. The sixth and perhaps most foundational quality is the capacity to be genuinely alone without distress, to sit in silence without reaching for stimulation, and to find in that silence not emptiness but clarity. The person who cannot tolerate being alone is a person whose sense of self depends heavily on the reactions of others. Compliments inflate them. Criticism devastates them. The approval of the room determines whether they feel confident or uncertain. And because of this, they are remarkably easy to influence, simply by controlling what kind of feedback they receive. The person who has made genuine peace with solitude is a different kind of person entirely. They can think without a crowd confirming that their thinking is valid. They can make decisions without needing everyone around them to agree. They can walk away from situations that compromise their integrity because their sense of self does not depend on maintaining the connection at any cost. Their inner life is rich enough that being alone does not feel like deprivation. It feels like space. In that space, something important happens. The noise of other people's expectations, judgments, and emotional needs fades far enough back that a person can hear their own actual thoughts. They begin to understand what they genuinely believe as opposed to what they have absorbed from the environments they have inhabited. They begin to distinguish between what they actually want and what they have been conditioned to pursue. They become, over time, more themselves and less a reflection of whoever happens to be nearby. And from that place of internal stability, they become remarkably difficult to control, not because they are cold or disconnected, but because they are grounded in something that external pressure cannot easily reach. These 6 qualities, the willingness to question your own beliefs, the discipline to examine your emotions rather than obey them, the courage to revisit painful experiences and extract their lessons, the breadth of curiosity that maps human nature from multiple angles, the flexibility to correct yourself in real time, and the strength to be genuinely comfortable alone, are not traits that announce themselves publicly. They develop privately, quietly, in the hours and the solitude that most people fill with distraction. The person who develops them does not necessarily look different on the surface, but they move through the world differently. They are slower to be deceived. They are harder to provoke. They are less likely to repeat their own mistakes. They are more capable of seeing clearly in situations where emotion makes most people blind. Most people will spend their entire lives reacting. Rare people spend their lives understanding. And the gap between those two ways of moving through the world is, in the end, the gap between being shaped by life and actually learning to see it.